What's going on, everybody? Ochoa here from SB Nation's bloggingtheboys.com. We hope you are very excited. The Dallas Cowboys have a new player. They have a lot of work to do. The first round of the 2021 NFL Draft is in the books, and we are here to break it down for you. Joining me today, the one and only Dave Sturchio from Chop Sports, from Jersey Boys, from all over the place, the king of the East Coast. Dave, thanks for joining us today. Also joining us, Connor Livesay of Talking the Draft. Connor has been a very busy man. Obviously, in the run-up to the draft, had a very busy night on Thursday night, joined us for our live show. Connor, your mic is muted, but if you want to unmute it, you want to join us, that would be nice. How's it going, Connor?
It's going good. My dog decided to start eating her breakfast right beside me. It's been down on the floor for about an hour and a half as soon as we kick this bad boy off. So I was trying to avoid the bowl knocking back and forth and the chopping of food. But yeah, I'm here and I'm doing good.
That's okay. Sturch, how was your night one of the draft?
Night one was great. We actually hosted a live party over at a local bar over in New Jersey. We had a good time. As the draft played out, they did a nice little live reaction of when Surtain went, and they got me on camera, and I was very upset, but it all worked out. So I think it all worked out.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about Patrick Surtain in the first round as a whole, going obviously 9 overall to the Denver Broncos, part of what triggered what the Dallas Cowboys did. And J.C. Horn obviously went at 8 overall right before him. Connor, we had done a live mock here on the show on Tuesday night, and in it, both Horn and Surtain had gone when the Cowboys were picking at 10. Kyle Pitts happened to be on the board, and that was the direction we went. How impossible would you have said this was at the beginning of the draft? It wasn't like 100% impossible, right, but it was among the less likely, ultimate, realities, I think.
Well, we even talked about that on the live mock we did the other day, because when the two corners went, a lot of people were like, that's not realistic. And I remember being like, that can happen. Like, it doesn't mean that Kyle Pitts is going to be the one to fall to you, but there was a really good chance that between Denver, between Detroit, between Carolina, that one of those three teams were going to take a corner. And I think the first domino that really affected everything that's not being talked about enough is San Francisco taking Trey Lance. Because I think if San Francisco takes Mac Jones, Denver might consider Trey Lance there. Carolina might consider Trey Lance there. But I just don't think those teams were ever in love with Mac Jones or Justin Fields for whatever reason. So the fact that there are, a lot of people's probably quarterback 2 or, quarterback 3, more than likely, wasn't on the board might have driven those teams to go a different direction. And that's probably what ended up happening.
Sturch, on the subject of Justin Fields, obviously the Chicago Bears took him trading up to number 11 overall with the New York Giants. New York ended up taking Kadarius Toney. I do feel like the Giants won the night within the NFC East. They picked up a future first-round pick. And remember, and I know you know, but obviously the Philadelphia Eagles already hold Miami's first-round pick next year. They could very well also hold Indianapolis's if things work out with Carson Wentz. So we're talking about a potential reality where the Giants and Eagles have 5 first-round picks between them in 2022. That being said, would you agree that the Giants won the night? The Cowboys, I think, orchestrated a fine trade back, all things considered, but it's tough to top New York's.
Yeah, I think the Giants did what they did. As soon as they saw the draft, the way it played out and everything was starting to fall their way, and Chicago, if they were going to get their guy, they were going to get their guy at that very point. So they had to get up and get him. I looked at the teams behind the Giants, Dallas being one of them. They weren't going to target a quarterback necessarily unless you got to New England. So that's why they jumped up and got their guy. But in that same thing, the Giants did pick up. And, yeah, we live in a world now where next year could be relatively scary. And I'm assuming, next year's draft, I'm sure Connor's all over it already because, now he's got 364 days to go get that done. But what I personally think is, the Giants, they took a serviceable wide receiver out of Florida. I like the kid, but ultimately, if we're grading the NFC East, I think Dallas probably finished 1A. I think Dallas's trade back was absolute genius on the Joneses part. Look, if you had in mind that you wanted these guys, Horn and Surtain, and they weren't there, and that was literally worst case scenario. So they had it in their mind, if they're not there, we can go back. And who's going to jump up? The Eagles to draft, to grab their flashy new toy. And I think the Cowboys benefited on the immediate. They're going to get that 3rd round pick this year. So I think they could benefit now, this year, right now.
Yeah, Connor, I'm gonna guess you haven't seen this movie, but I'm gonna assume Sturch has. Scent of a Woman. Connor, have you ever seen it?
Absolutely not.
Sturch, you have or have not?
No, definitely not.
Great Al Pacino flick. He plays a blind man, and there's one point where he wants to do the tango, and he has like an aide with him, and he's a military man, and he asks the aide for the coordinates of the dance floor. So he tells him, oh, it's about like so many yards wide, so many yards deep, whatever. Like this is what you have to work with, and he like flawlessly executes this tango, this wonderful, beautiful tango, like while being completely blind, and so that. Yeah, maybe that's an exaggerated way to put it, but to your point, Serge, I do kind of feel like that's what the Cowboys did. In that, like, all of a sudden, things went awry. And I want to get to the Micah Parsons pick specifically in just a moment. But Connor, outside of the NFC East, I love the Justin Fields pick just because I'm happy that he ended up somewhere where he can thrive. T's and P's to Andy Dalton, of course. Caleb Farley went to Tennessee. That happened a few times in different mocks that we did. What were some of your favorite picks made in the first round overall throughout the entire NFL?
For me, we just kind of talked about them a little bit, but I do like Philly coming up and getting their guy. I mean, they only gave away a late third round pick, so it's not like they had to give up a ton of draft capital. And we really thought that there was a good chance that Devontae Smith wouldn't be there at 12 because we thought the Giants would take him. So I love the aggressiveness that they play with. I mean, again, it has won them a Super Bowl and it's hurt them how it is right now. But, I mean, for them to, know what New York's going to do, go up and just kind of take their player while only giving up a third round pick, like I'll do that 10 out of 10 times. I really love what the Jets did too. They got their guy at 2 and then they moved up. Again, they were aggressive. They need that offensive line help. They need that offensive line versatility. They moved up to Elijah Vera Tucker, who I thought was slated to go 14, whether it was at Minnesota, whether it was one of the teams coming up to get him. I was really surprised to see Minnesota trade out of that pick, but also to kind of give them a little bit of credit, they moved down to 23 and still got a really good tackle prospect in Christian Darrisaw. So, I think those are some teams that stand out. You obviously got to like what Miami did too with Jalen Phillips and Jalen Waddle. They get to, impact guys on both sides of the ball. And then the last one I'll mention is the Browns just sticking there and picking Greg Newsome at 26. Not panicking, not picking, a project edge rusher and Jason Oweh or, Joe Tryon. They just stick there. They pick a corner. Now they've completely redone that secondary. 2 or 3 years ago, it was Cleveland, was pretty good offensively. The defense was okay, but the secondary was a mess. But now they have Denzel Ward. They can pair Greg Newsome with him and have 2 stud corners to really rebuild that defense and hopefully trying to make a Super Bowl run here in the next few years.
You mentioned Miami taking both Jalen's, although obviously spelled differently. It was Philly last year that took 2 different Jalen's with their first 2 picks, taking Jalen Reagor in the first round and then Jalen Hurts in the second. So a nice, little common thread there. Sturch, I feel like Justin Herbert is having the biggest glow up across the season, or across the NFL this season. Now has a brand new offensive lineman in Rashawn Slater. Chargers, Connor just talked about Cleveland sitting and being patient. I think the Chargers maybe got a little bit lucky. Certainly, I think a lot of Cowboys fans would agree that Dallas didn't take Rashawn Slater, but I feel like it's a nice move for the Chargers.
Yeah, no, you got to protect your golden boy. That guy's going to be the quarterback in the next 10 years, at the very least. The one thing I have to say, it rubbed me the wrong way, but the fact that the Patriots didn't have to do anything and still landed their guy, it annoys the crap out of me a little bit. But look, Mac Jones, I'm sure will be a great, fine athlete. But the fact that we were all sitting there like, okay, Patriots are definitely going to trade into the first 10 picks to get themselves a quarterback, and they didn't have to do anything. So that definitely rubbed me the wrong way.
That's all fair. That's all fine. We didn't even mention it, but Kyle Pitts went to the Atlanta Falcons. The dream is dead. So no worries. I know, Sturch, you were not in on Kyle Pitts to Dallas, but hey, it's all good. So let's talk about the Cowboys selection. Micah Parsons, obviously the newest member of the Dallas Cowboys. Interestingly enough, we had Dane Brugler on the roundtable show that we did here. Dane's 12th overall player. The Cowboys obviously land him at 12 overall, his number 1 linebacker. Connor, I know we spoke on the live show on Thursday night. you don't have him rated as highly. We now obviously have heard the Joneses speak about this. They are telling everybody that he was the highest rated player on their board at the moment, that he was higher on their board than Patrick Surtain and J.C. Horn. Connor, I know that you have some thoughts on that, but in a vacuum, assuming that's true, the ultimate path they took to get here worked out well. Again, assuming that particular data point is true.
Right. If you're looking at it that way and what, their process worked out to be, then they gotta love what happened. Being able to trade back to 12, pick up a top 100 pick, and get the guy that I think David Moore tweeted this morning that he was their number 4 overall player on their board. Like, they have to absolutely be thrilled with the process. For me, it's just I don't know how you get to that process. Like, I don't know how you get to thinking Micah Parsons is the 4th best. I'm not saying he's a bad player by any means. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying I don't see how you can watch this draft class and go, that guy is the number 4 ranked player in this class. And that's where I think, some of the issues come into play with kind of how they're evaluating some of these guys and how they're stacking them on their boards, given the positional value and talent that they've showed at their respective colleges.
Sturch, obviously a lot has been made so far in the aftermath and the fallout of the Cowboys taking Micah Parsons about his athleticism, his freakish athleticism, and how he has yet to really kind of scratch the surface on what he's capable of as a linebacker. Obviously opted out of last season, so it's been a long time since people have seen him play. Do you buy that? Do you buy that he is a peaking player, that he is somebody who can still learn and grow and develop? And obviously there's the caveat of that happening off the field as well with the Cowboys, and he's saying all the right things to his credit right now. In Micah's defense, and this is a reality for all people, you can't change the past, but he does seem to be operating the way you would want your first round pick to be operating right now.
Yeah, I definitely think considering, obviously the interview right away and then the secret audio and everything's starting to come out, he is checking all the right boxes right now. And of course, you're coached on that. He has an agent, you know what I mean? Like, he has guys that you have to nail these first couple interviews, because boy, if you don't, you'll be crucified for a long time. I think today, as a matter of fact, on Friday, they're going to introduce him around 3:00. So I'm excited to see what they say about him. But listen, I'm buying into the fact that, whether your opinions of opting out or, not opting out for the college season last year, it doesn't matter at this point. I just find him to be a fresher legs on the field. I mean, look, there's no grind of the season last year. He's still a freakish athlete. And if he hasn't even scratched the surface of his ability, then we're going to see our linebacking crew just definitely get better right away. I mean, look, we all said what we said. I personally have went on record plenty of times about Jalen Smith. But if these guys all are on one field, and you have a Mike linebacker in Parsons, the Sam linebacker in Jalen, and then you move Leighton over to Will, you got yourself a serviceable linebacking core with this guy. And now all of a sudden, Keanu Neal, who's been told that we're going to start you in the linebacker room, maybe he plays more safety. But maybe the Dallas Cowboys will address that today. So we'll see.
I think that's an interesting point, that maybe this does free up Keanu Neal's role, whatever that may have been. But Connor, I do think that if we looked at the floor of all defensive positions within the Cowboys prior to Thursday night, and we're talking about like average floor, like not necessarily worst case scenario, but average as we've known it to be for the last couple of years, I think you can make an argument that while I'm not at all intimating that the cornerback is a safe, situation for the Cowboys, that linebacker was the worst, or maybe linebacker was the loosest. Like you ever walk in the attic, not on the 2x4s, you know what I'm talking about? Like that's
mesh stuff, and you're like, am I going to fall through the ceiling?
Yeah, I think that you could make an argument that was the floor for the Cowboys linebacker group as a whole. I mean, not that Sean Lee would have affected that if he hadn't retired, not that Joe Thomas would have affected that if he hadn't gone to the Texans, but that's just the reality that the Cowboys have these sunk costs in Jalen Smith and Leighton Vander Esch, and so they have raised that, and I think that that's an important point with the addition of Micah Parsons.
Yeah, and I'm just the thing I keep kind of harping on, and maybe I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but the thing I keep going back to is you could have gotten a linebacker that probably would have done the similar thing that I think Parsons is going to do for you in these first 2 years on day 3. Like, you could have added a Cameron McGrone, who's the sideline speed, like the traitsy player, who just doesn't have the freakish athleticism and the size and the length that Parsons possesses. But you could have got a Cameron McGrone style of player in the 4th round, something like that.
Who's to say they still don't, though? You know what I mean? Like, who's to say?
I don't want them to now.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying like in the in the spirit of considering all potential realities, right? Like, who's to say they don't? And who's to say they aren't massively trying to remake the linebacker room? And again, like, I'm not saying that the addition of Cameron McGrone, we've talked about a lot of different linebackers over the course of the last few weeks, but I mean, we're a few days away from the deadline to pick up Leighton Vander Esch's fifth-year option. It doesn't seem like they're going to do that. The Cowboys can say whatever they want, but I mean, they could craft themselves a Jalen and Leighton-less reality starting in 2022 if they really wanted to.
Right. Well, my thing is like, you can't do that with the cornerback position, or you can't do that. It's hard. Let me say you can't. It's harder to do that with that position because of how much value it has. And you saw, like, in the first round, you saw Caleb Farley, a guy who has legitimate injury concerns, get drafted at 22. Like,
right.
The value of that position is so much higher than the linebacker, the running back, the guard position, that you can get, that guy in the third, fourth round. And because they're still around, because the NFL just doesn't see the need to draft them as high. We see it with running backs. We saw, Najee Harris and Travis Etienne did end up going in the first round, but they went at the very end, where 10 years ago, those are top 5 players. So for me, it's just, I would have valued the top two corners were gone, but I would have valued maybe, and again, we're splitting hairs at this point, but I would have valued the trade with Chicago. Go to 19, pick Greg Newsome, pick Caleb Farley, pick, one of those guys there, and pick up another top 100 pick over the position. It's not even the player with Micah Parsons. It's just the positional value for me.
Right. It's a linebacker in the top 12.
Right.
Totally.
And it's like RJ Choppy said this morning on the radio, like, they've had 2 top 10 picks in the last 5-6 years,
and they've spent them on positions that aren't as highly valued.
A linebacker, and they got a 3rd round pick out of it. Like, if you say that without saying the player, even if it could be, Nick Chubb and Bobby Wagner, you're still saying your odds of getting great value out of those picks is very, very, very low.
I think that's fair. In the context of the NFL draft as a chess game, which is how so many people view it, right? These pieces that hold value, and there are like personal preferences, like within chess, some people would trade a rook for like a knight and a bishop. It just depends like what your particular attacking style is. I'm a big chess guy. I don't know if either of you happen to know that, but so within that frame, and I think Sturch, so many people are pissed. Like, I think this isn't where Connor's coming from, but people are pissed because Micah Parsons represents not Patrick Surtain, not J.C. Horn. And a lot of people were so locked in on that for the last few months. And the reality is that they were gone. We had a comment during the live show that talked about, maybe say the Cowboys traded up to Carolina's spot for whichever one they preferred over the other. They probably would have had to have given up their 2nd round pick in the process to do it. And they certainly obviously wouldn't have picked up an extra 3rd rounder, number 84 overall from Philadelphia. So, I mean, that feels like a heavy investment. I think that most people in a value sense would take the situation they ultimately walked away from. But my last question on Micah specifically to you, Sturch, is let's use Caleb Farley as an example. Which risk are you more comfortable with? The risk of a lower positional value in the nature of the fact that Micah is a linebacker and the off the field concerns, or Caleb Farley, a player that certainly has a high ceiling and maybe arguably a high floor if things get right, but has this huge injury question mark with him, which is a bridge the Cowboys have been burned on before.
Well, that's exactly, you just nailed it right there. I was going to say, like, we've been down this road before. Jalen Smith is not panning out right now. Whether or not he's shown flashes of greatness, which I'm sure he has, and we've seen it. He came off this catastrophic injury. I'm not saying Caleb Farley's injury is even remotely close to that. It's not. But it is a back injury, and something that if we were to take Farley, are we talking every Sunday questionable? Did he practice? Does he have stiffness? Is there a spasm? There's a million things that you can deal with, but now you nail down whether, Connor or a lot of guys disagree with the value of taking that at a 12, which I get. I can get behind that idea because of the position. But man, if you watch this team last year like we did, linebacker was the gaping hole. You know what I mean? So that right there, to me, there are corners on day 2 that we can grab, and I know that Connor knows that, and I know you both know that. Day 2 is going to be a big day, and because the Cowboys stacked with this move back, they have the 3 picks in the 3rd round. Who's to say they're not going to trade up to get back into the 2nd round? Maybe they have guys that they covet. So I'm interested to see how aggressive the Cowboys got. I was hoping that was my bombshell last week when we talked when we did the round table. But I said I'd be thrilled and floored if the Cowboys went back into the first round with all the draft capital that they have, somehow get back in the first round and address whatever they didn't address at 10, meaning like they didn't get a safety or a corner or whoever. They didn't do that. I expect them to maybe do that today.
Well, they did not jump back up in the first round, as you mentioned. They have 4 picks today as it currently stands, 44, 75, and 84 overall, along with 99. 5 overall picks in the top 100 as it currently stands. Connor, Sturch was talking about day 2 targets. Who are your favorites? And we're talking about practical options at 44 right now.
Can I ask you guys one more question on Parsons before we go to this?
Of course.
So I just want to get your guys' opinion on it, but like, just because Sturch was talking about it, like we feel like linebacker was such a big hole last year on the team. With the way, like a lot of our concerns came because they weren't able to get off the blocks and they weren't really like reading, processing things correctly or quickly enough. While those are 2 of not my biggest issues with Parsons, because I think he's physical and quick enough to get off blocks. Like, do you guys still think? What I woke up to this morning is like the defensive tackles haven't gotten better yet. Like you added Brett Urban, who's kind of a better run defender, but he's more of like that 5 technique, like left defensive end that can probably play some 3 technique, can maybe do some nose tackle. But do you still have your concerns because he's not a guy who's super instinctive? He's not a super quick processor. He's not a guy who's just going to take on blocks and shove guys out and make tackles. Like, does that still worry you guys with the running game that with his prototype that you're still going to have those struggles at the linebacker spot?
I think for me, and Sturge can speak to it in a moment, but the fact that he is so much of what has been talked about with Micah has been his athleticism, right? Which is a gear and a element to his game that Jalen and Leighton supremely lack, right? And Jalen is a mess in a number of different ways, like even instinctually, like we talk about that all the time. And so we're already there. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not a new plight. That's not a new hill to have to get over or overcome. And so in that sense, I mean, I guess ultimately, and I know this sounds like bare bones, and so that's all I needed to be pleased here. Micah offers an option. And obviously a very athletic and a very versatile option it within the scope of his athletic prowess. And so that being said, that's something we have screamed about forever. Like how many times have we talked about the level of entitlement that the Cowboys as a whole apply? We've talked about it with Jalen, but it exists with Leighton Vander Esch as well. I mean, like if this was another team, they both obviously would not have seen the playing time that they did down the stretch in 2020, Leighton's injuries aside. And so like to me, this embodies and is representative of the fact that the Cowboys are moving forward in that capacity. And so while there are some things to split hairs over on, as you put it, this does seem like a step forward. I was so upset, and I wrote this huge 1,200 word diatribe when Jalen Smith said what he did about how if Jerry Jones wasn't upset about the game getting flexed off Sunday Night Football, then it was all good. And that's the plague, that's a really aggressive way to put it, that is within the Cowboys. And so I like that they are addressing that. And that's a whole different thing. And that is excluding the properties of value and the properties of where he fits schematically and things like that. But this is a forward step in that regard. And so overall, I'm pleased in very particular ways. And it feels like a step in the right direction. We'll see if the step ends up working out, but it does feel like a commitment to the future, which is something that we haven't seen from this team at the linebacker position. And even since Sean Lee, I mean, this has been let's hope we have our best day ever at the linebacker position and see if it works out for a decade. And that hasn't necessarily gone their way.
Yeah, no, I completely wholeheartedly agree with the fact that this kind of, and it comes from a fan perspective as well. Like almost you take a Micah Parsons and you're like, Jalen, you're on notice now. You know what I mean? And Leighton, you're on that linebacking court. You guys are on notice now. And that's something that if we didn't address it, right? If we didn't take Micah Parsons and you take a corner, you're thinking to yourself, all right, you know what? The corner works. We need it anyway. But this is almost like a stamp of what you just said, RJ. Like we're moving forward with or without you. Now's the time for a culture change. You got your new defensive coordinator in there. You got a second year under Mike McCarthy. Things are going to change in Dallas. I firmly believe that. I think we're finally turning that corner where it's more like we're done with the whole we like the guys we have, and this is now we're going to see that now as the draft progresses, and after the draft when you're still saying okay where are our holes and you're aggressive and you might sign a different a veteran There's plenty of guys out there. If you're not confident in what you do at corner, a Richard Sherman rings a bell to me. You know what I mean? Like, I know they can make ways to do it, but I just think that the Cowboys, by taking Parsons and by saying that we are now committed to change, and we are now saying, Jalen, get your stuff together, because if you don't, we have this kid waiting in the wings. You know what I mean? And now with the Neal thing, like I said before, there's variables, there's change, there's interchangeable parts. And we'll find out, obviously as the season gets closer and it starts, the season starts, we'll find out who gets what rotation. But it's a big deal.
I will say this is definitely being in operating in a fairly optimistic sense, but in passing on Rashawn Slater, they must, to some measurable degree, feel confident about Tyron Smith and Lyle Collins this season, and that's nice. And maybe that confidence is misplaced, but they do seem to feel that way, or at least in a larger sense that they do, about either the talents and abilities or even the health of Leighton and Jalen Smith as a tandem themselves. But okay, Connor, let's give us some day 2 targets to look for, because the Cowboys do have 4 picks to play with.
Yeah, I was actually getting ready to send out a tweet on this before we got on here. But my top ranked players, just a few of them I'll run through, is Azeez Ojulari, the Georgia edge rusher. He was 16 on my board. Ifeatu Melifonwu, the Syracuse corner, 19 on my board. Nick Bolton, the linebacker out of Missouri, was 23 on my board. Trayvon Morig, the safety out of TCU, 25th. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, the safety linebacker, at 26. Asante Samuel Jr., the cornerback out of Florida State, at 27. And Liam Eichenberg, the tackle out of Notre Dame, at 28. And we're getting close to those Christian Barmore. I wasn't a huge fan of Christian Barmore. I think he's the 31st ranked player on my board. So you're getting close to the point where, like, well, if he's there at 44, do we make that move? So there's a ton of good players still on the board. And that's why, and again, like, it's not like I'm pissed off about the pick like I was with Taco or Leighton a few years ago. I'm just a little bit lower on it than I guess the consensus. But, like, you don't want to judge it until
the class is over.
Well, I mean, for me, it's like you don't want to judge it until the end of the 4th round, because
sure,
the odds of a 5th or 6th or 7th round player coming in and start, making a huge impact year 1 isn't relatively high. But you could add a starting corner, at 44. You could add a starting safety at 75 and be like, you know what, it ended up working out a lot better than we thought it would. But it puts a little bit more pressure on them to hit on these pieces that are getting ready to come up, and especially in today's draft with the 4 picks they have. Like, you can't have your Chaz Green pick. You can't have your even like your Jordan Lewis pick, where it's like, is he going to be a starter? You have to find 2 to 3, home run style 4 starters in these 4 picks you're going to have. And most of them need to come on defense still.
You mentioned that, obviously, the 3rd round hasn't been their friend in that capacity. Last year, obviously, Neville Gallimore, so that certainly worked out well.
See, I actually think it's been pretty good to him.
Well, I was going to mention, because it is, in some senses, it's their, like other rounds are, but it's their lottery round. Like, Jordan Lewis was a bit of a big swing there. Chaz Green was a bit of a big swing there. And we're talking so much about the secondary and safety. JJ Wilcox was a bit of a big swing there. And so I think Micah represents, not to go back to that, but represents them staying true to what they're at least telling us is and was their board. And so that's that. Like, do that. Like, they did that last year, and it was a class that obviously a lot of people agreed with, and stay stuck in that sound philosophy. Sturch, the Cowboys absolutely have to walk away with what before Friday's over?
Defensive tackle. I think that
you have a higher priority on defensive tackle than you do on help for the secondary.
Well, the cornerback, like I said, I think the cornerbacks are deeper. You know what I mean? Like, when it comes to defensive tackle, Barmore stands out to me, and I think that if you can grab him at 44, I mean, that's a steal. I mean, I had him, I'm not as good as Connor, but I had him in the 1st round. You know what I mean? Like, I had this guy going in the 1st round. So if we can grab him, great. I do like Asante Samuel Jr. I think also Elijah Molden. He's a little small, but it's, those guys, those corners can immediately make a difference and not have to be so much the focal point. Like, if we would have drafted obviously Horn or Surtain, you're thrown in you're trial by fire. You know what I mean? Like, you are in. So now you do rely on your Jordan Lewis and your Anthony Browns and and a 2nd-year Trayvon Diggs. Those are your boys now. Now you really got to rally around those guys, and those guys are going to be responsible for bringing up and Asante Samuel Jr. or whoever they decide. I also think the Cowboys have to, no matter what they did already, they have to address the safety. I know it's hard for the Cowboys to do that for whatever reason. Like it's just, I feel like it's been a long lost art that they just can't address safety well in the draft. So I think, again, Trayvon Moehrig, you said before, I definitely like him. I'm a big Richie Grant a guy too. Like these guys are all there. It's going to be interesting. Like I said, when I saw that, you pulled up the draft board and I see all those third-round picks, I can't help but think like you could stack two of those, give 99, 75 and get back into the second round. There's takers out there because there's guys that don't have 10 picks like the Dallas Cowboys do this year. You know what I mean? So it's about being aggressive, staying true to their board, staying true to their defensive strategy, because again, the only offensive player I want to see drafted out of the Dallas Cowboys in literally 5, 6, 7 rounds is line. That's it. You want to take a flyer on a receiver in the 7th round, go for it. But I don't. That's it. Defense or bust. And they've started off, yesterday they started off successful in that regard. So we'll see if they, stick to it.
Maybe a bit earlier than the 7th round. Anthony Schwartz is somebody, I know we talked about Connor on our mock draft earlier this week. Hey, just being a little bit picky there. That's all. But either way, it should shape up to be a fun day. Connor, you're right. I think, generally speaking, we have felt better about bad first days for the Cowboys after Friday's over. That at least was the case, in 2017. That granted, that ended up working out, but with the Cowboys walking away with Cheeto and Jordan Lewis, that everybody felt a little bit. That was the offseason that the entire secondary left, so that really helped. 2018, I mean, the Cowboys landed Connor Williams, which has been kind of a so-so pick, and Michael Gallup, which made Friday all the more fun. He is Connor Livesay on Twitter at Connor NFL Draft. Go get his draft guide. It is out. All the information you need on his Twitter page. Dave Sturchio on Twitter, Dave Sturchio. He's doing something every single day. The guy never, ever sleeps. So go check out all of his fun and fantastic work. I'm RJ Ochoa. We'll be here live throughout all of the Cowboys picks on Friday and on Saturday as well. So don't go anywhere. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Have yourselves a great day. And let's hope that things work out today, guys. All right. So everybody have a great Friday. We'll see you Friday night.